Welcome to UC Today. My name's David Dungay. Today we are back for another big UC News show. I have with me a fantastic panel. I'm going to go around the room really quickly. We've got Zeus Kerravala on the show. We've got Evan Kirstel, Melissa Swartz, Blair Pleasant, Rob Scott, my co-pilot for today, Craig Durr and John Arnold. Welcome everyone to the show. We've got some fantastic news stories to share with you all, with some great analysis as well. I'll throw it over to my co-host now. Rob, what are we looking at first? What's first on our agenda?
Absolutely, David. Well, it's been another interesting month in the world of UC. Between tech layoffs and ChatGPT and the world of AI, hitting the headlines, there's still a number of quite interesting trends and big announcements happening across the UC space. Number one brand on our list, or number one vendor on our list this month has got to be Avaya. There's so much happening, so much conversation around what's happening at Avaya. So I was interested in starting with that one first, David, if that's okay, in terms of their bankruptcy announcement, and they've secured some funding. I was wondering whether we kind of dive into that one first. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great place to start. A brief rundown of the story. If you haven't already heard, Avaya has filed for Chapter 11 protection again for the second time in 5 years. What does this mean exactly? Well, they're going to be reducing their debt, which is around about $4 billion, just under $4 billion, by 75%. That's really important for Avaya. A few differences with this process than the previous Chapter 11 process. This is going to be done between 60 and 90 days. So it's going to be quick. Why so quick? The majority of the lenders involved, about 90% of them, agreed to this new sort of restructuring process. What do we need to know? I think shareholders are going to be a little bit upset over the next 90 days, as much of the equity will be going to those lenders. That's why they've agreed to this restructuring in the first place. Shareholders, many of them are going to be Avaya employees themselves as well. So we're going to see a little bit of fallout there. But in all, this is clarity for Avaya, right? So there's been question marks being thrown around, but this is a bit of a clear path forwards. But what I'm really interested in is what our panelists think today. I'm going to go to Zeus first. Zeus, Chapter 11 for Avaya. Again, what does it all mean?
Yeah, Chapter 22 is what people are calling it now, right? Because it's 11 twice. So for Avaya as a company, it's a good thing. I've likened Avaya historically to being a very high income earning person that decided to go out and buy 2 homes, a luxury yacht, a couple cars, and go through a few divorces. So their output of cash was higher than their input of cash. Now, with the debt restructured and dropped by 75%, that creates a lot more cash flow for them. And actually, they only have $800 million in debt remaining, and that doesn't have to get paid to 2028. So the negotiation that they did with the creditors actually, I think, is very favorable to them. This is, it puts Avaya in a good position financially. As you mentioned, it's bad for employees, especially ones that did participate in the stock purchase program. It's bad for shareholders. So as you go back in the market, right, you've got to reconvince those shareholders. There's that expression, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me, right? This will be, the third time or the second time a shareholder, would have lost all their equity from something like this. But this all comes down to, Dave, it's great that the revenue to debt ratio is something more manageable, but now the company has to grow, because if you remember the last time they restructured, their revenue to debt ratio was a lot more manageable, but then the company really couldn't execute on its growth plans, and then eventually the debt became too big for the company to service. So it's the same old story here. I do think their current CEO, Alan Masarek, has a pretty good plan in place. I know the company is a lot more focused than it was under the previous leadership. So I don't think we're going to see a lot of attrition of customers. I think if they were going to leave, they would have left the last time Avaya went into bankruptcy. Also, moving a lot of Avaya's customers, the very large ones, and moving those companies away from those big, massive on-prem systems isn't an easy thing to do. And so I do know last time they stayed in touch with the customers pretty closely. I'm expecting that again, but I do feel bad for the employees, more so than the shareholders, but the employees in particular that had a lot of their savings and retirement and things wrapped up into it.
Has there anyone else got any comments on the Avaya Chapter 11? Obviously, there's Ring Central are involved in this as well, sort of a deepening and an extending of that partnership around the ACO product. What does the rest of our panel think on that?
Well, I was going to say, Ring Central and Avaya did renegotiate their relationship. So now Avaya Cloud Office sales are no longer on Avaya paper. No, now they are on Avaya paper. They used to be on Ring Central paper. So some of the partners were, not that thrilled about necessarily, pushing that solution. But now that it's on Avaya paper and now it's a resale relationship with Ring, the idea is that Avaya partners are going to be more willing to push ACO. So I think we're going to see more activity coming out from there.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Blair, on this. We've seen some of this before. These are the downsides of being a public company. And I think Mitel has probably the longest track record of going public, going private, going public, going private. And who knows where this is going to take things, right? But I think, as far as the leadership goes, they got the most important piece out of the way now, getting that debt down. I've been saying all along, and I'm sure we all feel the same way, this is the problem isn't their technology, right? It's their management, it's their go-to-market, and like you say, Zay, it's the execution. And, I from what I know, I don't think there's a better guy than Alan Mazurek who can do the job of restoring trust and confidence, because that's what, to me, this is all about. He's appeased the financial guys to give them a runway. Now he's got to do the same again with the channels and the key customers. Like you say, the big enterprise customers can keep the company solvent, but the longer term, I think, strategy for them is obviously, like you say, Zeus, is growth. You can't keep milking the same cow over and over again, and this is where they're really going to struggle. And this is where, frankly, I think Ring is staying quiet. They're biding their time, but they always make their move in a big way at a time that is of their choosing to get the best advantage. And I would just keep an eye on Ring's activities with how they do business with Avaya, because I think they're going to have a say in this at the end, one way or another.
Yeah, John, I think it's interesting that you brought up Mitel, because I think they're actually the ones who might benefit from all of this, because for companies that are looking for private cloud solutions, there aren't that many alternatives. And we know that, there are still a lot of companies that don't necessarily want, a public cloud like, a Ring Central. So there are companies that are looking for solutions that Avaya and Mitel offer. So this actually might be positive in some ways for Mitel.
Yeah, I think the other aspect of this is who Alan hires from here. One of the problems that the previous CEO at Jim Chirico is he couldn't keep his senior leadership on board, right? They churn through CTOs and things like that. And so, right now they have a lot of executive openings. They've got an interim CFO in place. They don't, they've got a couple of people who head of product. Yeah, and so I think now when I asked Alan about it, he said, I can't hire anybody. Well, there's still a lot of uncertainty in the air. What am I supposed to do? Go to somebody and say, come join me, but I'm not sure what the company is going to look like, right? So now that the restructure is done, that does open the door for him to go out and make some hires. And so, that'll be a real litmus test of his leadership, is who he's able to bring on board and help him, execute on those plans, because he can't do it alone.
Well, and they do have work to do on the product side as well. I mean, they will even admit that their CCaaS product isn't where they want it to be, and so it's out there, but it needs work. And obviously on the UC side, they're not doing a lot of development on the UCaaS. I mean, there's the Ring Central thing. So they have product work to do, which did not used to be the case for Avaya. They used to have great products, and really, like you said, it was the management and the poor marketing, that kind of thing. But I think now they've got work to do on the product side as well.
Certainly one to watch, isn't it, David?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's clarity, isn't it, for Avaya? So they've got structure in place. They've got, getting that debt under control is the big one. And I think actually, to Melissa's point, it'd be nice to see them, use this clarity, this better financials to do that work they need to on the product side, for sure. But of course, like a lot of these stories, we're not at the end of this story for Avaya. We're going to be watching it carefully over the coming weeks and months. And it was going to be fascinating to see how it plays out and what kind of Avaya we get at the end of it. Rob, should we move on to our next story? What have we got?
Yeah, sure. I mean, topic number 2 is quite an interesting one. Zoho have entered the UC space with a new product called Zoho Workplace, or certainly a UC-based product. It's got most of what businesses need, but does UC need Zoho? And I think that's the question here. Well, what's your take, David? Is this start of a new trend, CRM players coming into the UC space? What's your take?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's interesting. We used to talk a while ago that the CRM vendors had already won the fight for the desktop, right? And this is kind of a natural extension of that. We saw Salesforce and the Slack acquisition not too long ago, although not necessarily gone according to plan over there. But I think this is fascinating, right? I learned recently Zoho Workplace has got 16 million users already, and UCaaS to me is just a natural extension of what the CRM providers are already bringing to the table. So I guess my question to the group is going to be, is this the start of the CRM vendor sort of competition? What's that going to look like? Blair, I'd really keen to get your comments on that.
So I kind of disagree with you a little bit in that you're positioning Zoho as a CRM vendor. So, that is a big part of their business, but they offer so much. I mean, if you look at all the products that Zoho offers, it's unbelievable. They offer so many different types of capabilities. They've got email, they've got, the whole productivity suite, word processing, presentations. I mean, basically, I look at them more like I would look at a Microsoft or a Google. And when they went into UC and offered voice capabilities, it just seemed like a natural. So for me, it's kind of the same for Zoho. I mean, yes, CRM is a big part of what they do, but they've got this whole other area, of productivity suites. So if you look at it from that perspective, it really does make sense for them to get into this area. And frankly, I was wondering why it took them so long to get into voice and things, because they've had meetings, they've had team collaboration. So adding some of the voice and Trident capabilities really seemed like a natural to me. So I think it's really good for Zoho and for their customers.
Yeah, I would actually agree, Blair. And I think 2023 for me is like the year of the bundle, whether it's on the consumer side with Apple family bundles or, Zoom bundling multiple products. Obviously, Microsoft is all about the bundle. And why not? I mean, if you can bundle multiple products, offer discounts and clever packaging is a great way to grow in this year of efficiency and cost reduction. So, what else could they throw into the bundle, I think is the more interesting question.
What'll be interesting to watch is the devaluation of what happens to the pricing in this industry, right? Like, you mentioned Google, Microsoft get into it. They treat UC almost as a feature of their other products, not a product, where Zoom, Ring, and those companies treat it like a product. And, Zoom actually through email and calendar into UC. And so the question becomes, what's the anchor application? And so if the anchor application is the things that people use more often, which Blair, you pointed out a lot of those Zoho tools, then they can almost commoditize the UC stuff, right? And so it'll be interesting to see how the UC vendors now respond.
So a lot of what Zoho is doing really is to make it easier for customers to access all of their capabilities. So I think we're seeing that more of the focus. When I had a briefing with them, they kept talking about, their central desktop being the center of gravity. They kept using that term, center of gravity. And to Evan's point, bringing everything together to make it easier for customers to access everything in one place. So I think that's really the angle, is that not so much that they want to be, the top UC vendor and the top, voice leader, but they want to make it easier for their customers to be able to access all the capabilities that they need from one desktop, from one application, and really simplify things for their customers.
I want to build off of what Zeus said, is they are already there. This particular suite is priced anywhere between $3 and $6 per license head. And so it's a really low cost entry into a unified communication suite. And it does build off that large installed base. 16 million people are using their workplace applications, productivity suite. But meetings isn't new to them. They launched their meetings application way back in 2007. That's before Zoom launched, if you want to put it in terms of a timeline context. And because they're bringing these synergies, they're kind of like this sleeping dragon, this sleeping tiger coming to this space, if you want to have an analogy for it. Because if you look at how meetings are developing, you have people that have come to it as kind of voice first, like RingCentral. You have people come at it kind of meeting first, like Zoom. And then people come at it that are productivity first, such as Microsoft and Google. And those two guys have such a large sharehold on that market. It's a challenge. So all of a sudden, out of nowhere, David, to your point, 16 million productivity users are now close. It's a very sizable challenge for that space. It could really turn it up.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? With 80 million worldwide Zoho users, I imagine that's going to be their primary channel for selling into initially, at least. So lots to play out there, I'm sure. David, moving on to topic number 3 today. I think it would be worthwhile talking a little bit about Cisco's recent results. More layoffs, it seems, for Cisco in this period, like other the vendors in the UC space. For example, Zoom recently made a whole bunch of layoffs as well. But something interesting in their earnings call, their sales was down by 10%, and there was something around kind of meetings being down within the Webex component of that bit. So I was keen to kind of understand, what's happening at Cisco, or is that just kind of Cisco losing it out to maybe Microsoft's recent 10 million extension of their user base. So what's your position on this one?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, I'll clear up the numbers. First of all, in terms of earnings, they're actually there's an increase of 7% year on year. So they're going in the right direction. But as you alluded to, the interesting part of that was there was a decrease by 10% in the business unit that houses Webex. Now, I would have thought in this digital world that would be the part of the department to see explosive growth. Now, CFO Scott Heron actually came out and said this is because of the decline in virtual meetings we're all seeing. That presumably that's in the wake of the back to work trend that we've kind of been talking about for 6 months to a year now. But that didn't quite add up to me in my mind. We've seen RingCentral recently came out with some fairly good growth figures, as does Microsoft Teams. Everything seems to be about Microsoft Teams right now. 270 million daily active users, I believe. So I'm not quite sure if that decline in online meetings narrative is correct, but that's what our great panel is here to sort of comment on. I'm going to go to Evan first. What are your thoughts on those results, Evan? And does that sort of make sense to you around that meeting component?
No, it doesn't make sense to me anecdotally, because I'm in more meetings than ever, and everyone I know is in more meetings than ever. But I think Cisco's between the proverbial rock and a hard place. The rock being Microsoft, the hard place being Zoom, Google, and about 18 other vendors I could rattle off on the top of my head. This is the most competitive, dynamic space in tech right now, and it is really hard to maintain, market share. I don't care what your name is, unless it's Microsoft. So, what say you guys? I mean, do you think this is just a competitive challenge to Cisco?
Yes, Teams certainly has taken a big chunk out of them. I think Cisco's sweet spot's always been large enterprise, which is also Microsoft's. I do think, though, Dave, you do need to break down that number, that 10%. That's the overall collab business. Cisco, like other product areas, has a declining kind of legacy business and then a growing cloud business. Security is going through this as well. I remember Chuck talking about that, where it only grew 7%, where Palo Alto and Fortinet grew in the 20s and 30s, right? And so Chuck explained that the same way. We have this declining hardware business and this growing cloud business. But I do think for Cisco, one of the things I think they haven't done a very good job of is sell the palette when it comes to hybrid work. Hybrid work requires networking, it requires security, it requires collaboration. And if Microsoft is throwing Teams in as part of their productivity suite, there's no reason Cisco can't throw Webex in as you buy more security and as you buy more networking, because their share there is, especially on the networking side, right? They're still the de facto standard. And so they have to figure that out as a way of playing that hybrid work angle to pull through Webex versus trying to lead with Webex all the time.
Yeah. I just want to add to that too, Zeus, that, Microsoft owns a desktop, always have, always will. And, Cisco plays the same role in networking for the world that we're looking at for the most part. And to Evan's point, the competitiveness of the market is, UC it's not quite a race to zero, but it's going to follow the same path that VoIP did. And so that number, David, about the 10% drop, I didn't get a close look at that, but I'm assuming that's revenues, right? I'm sure if they're tracking metrics like seats, like minutes, number of meetings, I'll bet those numbers are pretty good. But they're not reflected in the revenues because the prices, it's just too competitive a market. And frankly, when we talked about Zoho getting into this space, I don't think anyone goes into UC to make money now. It's really more about holding on to their customer base and, to Zeus's point, selling where you can actually make money. And in Cisco, I don't think anybody has the portfolio that they do to support an enterprise where collab is just one other kind of platform amongst many others that they need to organize and integrate with. And that's really where Cisco can make their big money and draw the channel to a much bigger sell than just trying to compete against all the cloud players with UC, because I don't think that's a game they can win. And frankly, nobody's really going to make money doing that. So, and we also have to keep in mind, to Zeus's point too, that networking is what makes them the money. Collab is still maybe 10% of their overall business. So, but it gets an outsized attention just because of how busy this marketplace is. But in the big scheme of things, Cisco will be fine. But the Webex challenge is pretty big. I think for all of us, if we count, like Evan, you say we're on meetings all day long. How many of them are on Webex? A handful for me. It's mostly Teams and Zoom and other stuff, but it's not so much on Webex. So I think, like you say, Evan, anecdotally, what we're all living with is probably a pretty good reflection of what's happening in the market.
There's probably two things that you could look at to further support that. It's the idea that Cisco has talked about their strategy of moving a lot of these individual licenses to their Flex licensing suite, and that kind of hides both the revenue and the seat count, the active use. They're not as transparent, or they haven't made an announcement like Microsoft. But, put a pin in this. I think Microsoft's announcement is going to prompt Zoom and Cisco to start talking a little bit more about their monthly active users specific to the meeting workload. But and the second thing also they've done really unique with their strategy too in the collaboration space is you notice the emphasis on hardware as of late. Their Microsoft partnership, for example, and really leveraging that core competency. They've got some great IP. They've got some of the best endpoint devices in the market. So maybe they are shifting their model, David, to your point. Maybe they are trying to take advantage and harvest where they have some good IP and momentum, and otherwise leverage this for networking or other add-on sales as well.
We're seeing a number of companies right now, especially in the news, bringing employees back to the office. I mean, do we think that's going to have an impact on our market this year?
Oh yeah, no, I think it makes. I think you and I, Rob, talked to this before, where I think hybrid work I think is largely going to be a disaster this year for companies as they try and figure out what exactly hybrid work means, right? And everybody's implementing it differently, but it certainly does crack the door open for somebody to come in and lead that. And I do think, while we're on the topic of Cisco, their willingness to go build out spaces and drag people through them and show them what's possible, actually, I think is a good way to kind of sell what's possible. Because I think when it comes to hybrid work, I don't think people really understand a lot of the capabilities that have been built into these products to make hybrid work better, right? And every vendor's loaded these things up with AI capabilities, from transcriptions, translation, you got together modes and things like that. But I think a very small percent of customer actually use a lot of those advanced features, and so the door is open for someone to try and take a leadership position here.
Oh, not only not using it, but some of them are actually still fearful. There's this idea that the the spaces in themselves with these new technologies, intelligent cameras or intelligent audio, and these, when you are in those meetings, they're those must-have meetings. It's a C-level person or something, and they don't want to. It's difficult to trust this stuff to these intangibles. Is the camera really framing everyone correctly? Did it not get Rob or David's side of his face, and did it pick up everyone well, or is there a delay in the audio over the platform, and people talk over each other, things like that?
I think to Zeus's point about hybrid work, I was recently, helping a colleague look for a job. So many of these jobs were remote. I mean, so many of them were remote. So even if people are going back to the office, I think remote work, and even if it's not remote work, we still have people, working in different locations and different offices. Enterprises have lots of branches and people working all over the place. So I think the need for these types of tools is definitely going to continue for the foreseeable future. I don't see it going away at all. Even if people, even if 80% of the companies are back in the office, they still have remote employees, who are working from their offices because things are distributed and internationally spread out. So I think it's going to continue.
I actually had an interesting meeting with NTT, the Japanese phone company, who, during COVID, they moved all of their workers remote, office workers, which was kind of disastrous for the Japanese culture because, Japanese homes are really small. There's no room to work from home, and yet they were thrust into this situation. And so now they're moving not to back to the office, but back to third-party kind of workspaces, co-working spaces. So they're taking their central offices, these brick buildings here in the U.S. that are everywhere, and they're sort of turning them into central offices / co-working spaces so that, the Japanese company men and women can move out of the house, which is just way too small for remote work, into these little mini co-working spaces. So they're still, quote, remote, but they're not at home. And I think, the rise of WeWork, again, is just an example of how people want to get out of the house to some degree, but it might not be back in the office in HQ.
Exactly. Yeah. It's so easy when we're talking about Cisco and Webex of filtering everything through the lens of technology, and hybrid work is so much more than just that. And yeah, Blair, we need the features and the capabilities, but to me, this is a little bit like the PBX. It had 1 million features and people only use 5 or 6 of them. And right now there's such an arms race going on with all the collab players adding more and more features. I don't think that solves the hybrid work issue at all. And Evan, I'm glad you mentioned WeWork because, they were just 5 years too early, right? And now I think it's the perfect solution to have that middle ground where you've got a safe space to go to that gives people a sense of, I don't have to stay at home all day, because it's really, for most people, it's a pretty crappy way to work. We're lucky. We've been doing this a long time, but most people aren't cut out for it. The isolation is not healthy. So if you're going to make hybrid work, to me, the cautionary tale here is just like the PBX got disrupted from companies who are outside the telecom space. I think the collab space could easily be overshadowed by an innovative company that comes out of nowhere that isn't in this business, but comes up with a better approach to hybrid work. And I'm not sure what that company is right now. Maybe it is Google, who knows? But I think there's plenty of room here for disruption to find a better way, not to keep the collab people happy, but to keep the CFOs happy, to keep the facilities management people happy. And there's so many tangents here we're just seeing the beginnings of, and no one knows who's going to own it. But I think it's totally wide open.
I think that from working remotely, people got people were just thrown into remote work. And so kind of a DIY from the user perspective as far as tools went, like just get something up and working. So now there's these high-end tools, but everybody's already figured out they can get by with less. And so I think it's going to take some effort to make companies want to spend on that high-end vision when they already know they can eke it out and get by with what they're doing already.
Metaverse.
Well, I think that's a really good, interesting place to end our conversation today. Actually, I mean, look, there's so much innovation going on. You're right, John. This year is also the year I kind of feel AI is going to hit us all square in the face, and that's going to really have a big impact. We've been talking extensively about tools like ChatGPT on on UC Today, and our other platforms as well. So I'm really looking forward to continuing this conversation throughout the course of the year and sort of seeing where we get to. We're at the end of our session today. Before we go, I'm just going to hand over to Rob. We've got some events coming up, which is great to put into your calendar. There's lots of innovation going on at these events. So, Rob, what's going on in the market?
Absolutely. So we've got 3 notable events coming up in the next few weeks or so, I would say in this quarter. We've got Mobile World Congress in Barcelona in Spain. By the time this video is aired, it's probably just about happening or just about finished. We have the Cloud Comms Summit organised by Cavell Group in London. That's on the 8th of March. And then after that, towards the end of March, 27th to the 30th, we've got Enterprise Connect, the big one in the US, which is, I'm sure we're going to see each other there. Very much looking forward to that gathering, because it certainly is the industry's biggest collective gathering of UC folks. So that's it from me, but there's a whole bunch of other events coming up after that, but I'm sure we can cover those off in the next one.
Absolutely. Well, without further ado then, I'd like to say thank you to all of our guests and panelists today. Your insights are much appreciated as always. My name's David Dungay. You've been watching UC Today. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.